It's Joe, your faithful host and co-founder of Command Control Power, the longest-running Apple consulting podcast. In case you missed our birthday, we just celebrated our 10th anniversary this summer. For 10 years, we've been getting together each and every week to bring you epic tales of tech support and business management, and I'm pretty sure we've saved a lot of people a ton of time by sharing our struggles and solutions. Starting now, we're shifting our focus to the Patreon community. That means the newest shows will be posted primarily on Patreon. How do you get the latest episodes? Visit commandcontrolpower.com and click on support. Pledge monthly, and you can instantly subscribe to the weekly patron-only episodes right in your favorite podcast app. If you already support us on Patreon, log in there to get your special link and subscribe to the patron-only show so you don't miss anything. Here on the public show, we'll be featuring classic episodes hand-selected for you from our catalog of over 500 episodes, along with occasional new episodes too. And remember, we're regularly releasing new content on Patreon, where you can join our community of supporters starting at just $15 per month, giving you access to the freshest content. We feature dozens of exclusive shows on Patreon where we speak a little more freely about how we make business decisions, navigate client relationships, manage our employees, and sometimes deal with mistakes and difficulties too. Plus, as a patron, you receive access to our entire back catalog where you can revisit classic episodes and learn from colleagues we've interviewed who've shared their own best practices. Visit commandcontrolpower.com and click support to pledge monthly on Patreon. We'd really appreciate your support, and we're confident your business will benefit from the wisdom of the community we've gathered there. Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy this episode of Command Control Power. We are very pleased once again to be joined by Lucas Acosta from Foojee, CEO of Foojee. Thanks for joining us, Lucas.
Oh man, it's so good to be back. Had a blast last time, and it's just always good to get y'all's perspectives on things. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, we got some good feedback from re-airing the show. I think we had you on about 5 years ago. And at that point in time, you were like 50%, 60% engineer dealing with, as you put it back then, printer issues. And I guess the state of the art was High Sierra updates back then. Here we are many years later. And I think people would love to hear an update on, I guess, what percent engineer you find yourself operating as these days and how things have been transitioning since that show. Yeah, can you bring us up to speed a little bit from there?
Oh yeah, sure thing. And I listened back to that because it served as a great, almost like a journal entry, just to see what state of mind I was in as a business owner during that year. And I cannot tell you how many experiments or different things we've tried since then. I was always shifting around and that percentage of how much engineering I was doing. And today let's say it's close to 0%.
Wow.
Other than certain things that may get escalated to me, or if there's a new project where someone needs to tap into my ancient Mac OS trivia to tackle something, I'm roped into things. But as far as like tickets and being in the ticketing queue, yes, I am out. It's been about 2 years since I was out of the queue, and more recently about the last, let's say 12 months where, yeah, I've been almost completely out. So there's your answer on kind of engineering. And again, that was a number that was always going back and forth over the last 15 years now. And I share all of our stats, I guess, purely as just a benchmark. I'm still learning every day. Right now, we're at 9 people, and we're in 4 states. We started here in Atlanta, Georgia, and I think it was around year 6 where we branched out to Nashville. And so we're also in Alabama, and then our newest one is Denver, Colorado.
Nice.
So seeing where the opportunity is, try not to get ahead of our skis, which is a new phrase that I've learned since going to Colorado.
Nice.
Try to get too ahead of ourselves because, at the end of the day, we're running our business based on cash, no investors or anything like that. So it certainly has to make sense, and I have to keep just make sure we're taking care of the rest of the business first. As far as like benchmarking, we did hit, I guess it's a significant milestone. It's a little arbitrary too, but last year, I guess at the end of 2022, we broke $1 million in annual revenue. We broke it by $50,000. So it was 1 million. $50,000 was our revenue, just barely eked through it. And we had been at a plateau for several years before that. Again, there's nothing really magical about 1 million, but it was more like the plateau. If I were to show you a numbers spreadsheet for 4 or 5 years, we're just hovering like around 800. And again, there's nothing specific that comes from the number, but just, hey, where's the progress? So we'll get into that and maybe some of the management things that we've put in place. And the other milestone that I hit without realizing it when I was running the numbers a few weeks ago is in February this year, we hit $1 million in annual recurring revenue.
Wow. Congratulations. That is huge.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I was like shocked that it happened so quickly, or like our percentage of recurring services was that high, honestly. So that was like a retroactive celebration I had to share with my team. Nice. By the way, guys, this is like pretty cool. So yeah, I guess that goes to show that the high majority of what we do is MSP, like recurring service agreements with small businesses.
I have many questions already, but I'll start with a couple of initial ones. Just based on what you said so far, that just a few light bulbs went off in my head, and just thinking of how you got there and things like that. But we will get into it. I do have a question about your organizational structure, since you've mentioned that you're in multiple locations now. Do you run it all from Atlanta and just have, let's say, a consultant or maybe multiple consultants in that other area or other region? Or do you have like managers of those regions?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we've actually played both sides of the coin. Just being an open book here, we started this idea by wanting to look for other entrepreneurial kind of consultants, like we all are, and having them lead a city. So someone who can wear multiple hats like the four of us do, right? You can sell, you know how to invoice, and you can do the technical work. And while we actually did that for several years to get to all four of our states, about a year ago, we made a pretty significant pivot away from that. I'm telling you, it has been such a relief, because we have actually, we're not growing that way anymore. So we would call them city leaders, and they would be the leader of that city, and anyone that we hire, they would have the final say in that city. But as far as the back end structure, we're all one company, and we all share the same ticketing queue. So that I'm sure everyone runs their multi-site business a little bit differently, but I always like this idea of one Foojee, and we're all hanging out virtually throughout the whole day. And really, it was just the city leader that was going after business, being that sales and the Apple Store touch point for that local city. Outside of that, it's all one team, and they were compensated based on bonuses, based on their revenue in their city. So while a lot of parts worked well for that, like we didn't necessarily crash and burn or anything, we just reanalyzed this when I started promoting the leaders to have a bit of a management team, which sounds so corporate. Just, I know that sounds pretty foreign just all on its own, but we're all consultants, like also, and still have our toe in the pool for consultant work. We have a management team. We realized that it's very difficult to find another Joe in another city, or another Sam in another city. And it's not impossible. It's just very difficult. So we've now pivoted to just have an engineer in each city, and then centralize our sales. And all that really means is we have one person running business development. We like to use business development as the term, because sales has an icky connotation to it. Yeah. Josh, he's based out of Nashville. He was our Nashville city leader, and he was crushing it so much. We thought, hey, let's try this new model. Who should lead sales for the whole company? Let's see if Josh is interested. So he said, absolutely. And now it's his responsibility to build those relationships with the local Apple stores, to manage all incoming leads. And now there's one consistent message coming from one person. Instead of me as the founder trying to rally the troops and check in with all the cities, how the city's sales going, that was a lot of work to try to lead for 3 or 4 people. And the other little component or reason why we found success is that the city leaders were having to split their time. And we, as founders, we're not afraid of that. Like we've all of us here have always split our time between multiple things. But it's hard to comprehend because we only multitask as founders. But I've seen the leaders have told me that they are way more effective if there's just someone focusing on sales. And then our ops guy, who used to be a city leader in Alabama, the Huntsville city leader, since we've taken that responsibility off his plate, he has thrived in his work as director of operations. And so it wasn't an ego thing. I was very clear with that at the very beginning. This isn't about who's good, who's not good. It's who's the best person for the job. And we could also see who was going to excel in certain roles. And he had good operational kind of tendencies and a track record here at Foojee of implementing operational things. So that's why we asked him. And he can breathe easy because now he doesn't have to think about visiting an Apple store or doing proposals. It's 100% on managing projects and operational policies. Very long answer because we have a long history. And so right now, the short answer is we are now centralized, even though that I was like hesitant to go that route because it just sounds more corporate. It's unlocked a lot of our potential because by being centralized, each person is like operating at 100%, right? If they're passionate about their role, they can listen to podcasts on that role. They can read books on that role, and they can just really double down on being great in that singular role. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think a couple of key insights there. The idea of a founder inherently being good at multitasking, I think, is one skill that enables a founder to be successful. So there's probably a filter there where if you make it this far as a founder, you're probably good at multitasking. You probably like multitasking. I think I tend to appreciate the changing dynamics of what my day might look like in any given day because I can shift focus and sometimes throughout the day shifting focus as well.
Yes.
And I've noticed certainly my staff may not be as inclined toward that. I have been working on a project in my office recently where my day might be refurbishing old equipment and doing physical labor, like bringing things to the local transfer station, taking a quick remote, making some sales calls, things like that, all interspersed throughout the day. And I just have a natural kind of tendency to say, okay, I know this is going to fit in right now. Let me just pick up the phone real quick. I'm waiting for something to finish here. Whereas I think it's less natural for other people in more focused roles to be able to do that. They might need to have a day where they focus on one specific task or project and not necessarily continue to shift gears throughout any given day.
Yes.
To the extent that I do. And yeah, I think that's a key insight is that don't assume that your team will have the same inclination toward multitasking or same ability to do it. So that's a really smart insight, I think, that you've pointed to. I'm curious if there's any other kind of specific traits or just things you've noticed that you could identify as what led you to notice that certain people on your team would be suited for these specific roles like business development or operations?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is hard, especially when we're always multitasking sometimes, to look at trends. The first step on seeing who would be good for what is actually deciding that you need help.
Yeah.
And I think we're all pretty humble folks. We know how to work with team members and collaborate and whatnot. But I'm talking and I had people that had certain authority over others here in the team, but it wasn't until about 2 years ago when we did this EOS implementation, which is just it's just a way to run your business. And they've put a fancy name on it, like how Kleenex is tissue paper. It's just a certain way to run it. But it was through this kind of exercise where put the roles on an org chart and realized that my name was in a lot of boxes on that org chart. And so being honest with myself that, okay, my name is in 7 boxes of different tasks across the company, that I realized I need to get other people. So that really is the first mental milestone I had to come to before going all in here. And then you don't need EOS for this, but if you just looked up, like, what are the responsibilities for 3 major roles in every company? Sales, operations is the second. The third is like finance and admin, like HR stuff. And so EOS has a list of what tasks that director is supposed to do in sales, director is supposed to do in ops, and then finance. So you're not having to reinvent the wheel. That's what I like about EOS, is I'm not having to read a textbook to understand what traits I should be looking for. And so just by seeing a list there, and I'm talking, I'll pull it up. We just thought, hey, who would be 1 or 2 candidates on our team? At the time, we were like 7, regardless of their current role, right? We have to be real about this, whether they just got hired this year or they've been an engineer for 6 years. Who would be great at this role? And part of the process of choosing is we just told them, hey, your name came up, like me and my number 2 guy at the time. He's still here, but like back then we didn't have any structure. So he was just like my number 2 guy. We said, hey, your name came up. We think your name came up. We're thinking about putting a leadership team together and looking for an operations role. What do you think about that? And what we did is just let them talk. Let them show you how excited they are at the idea of there being that role. Would they be a little hesitant? That sounds great. I hope you pick the right person. You'll know in that first conversation if they're going to be interested or not. And so if they're the right person, or if they say, oh my gosh, that's phenomenal. Hey, I'd love to be in the running for that. If you guys are going to be interviewing, please let me know. I want my name in the hat. So you can gauge interest that way. And then we had to create a job description. And it's just took a little bit of homework, but just a 1-page simple job description. And we gave it to them and then told them, hey, here's the job description. We're going to be doing a couple of interviews to see if this is going to be the right fit for you. And so that's how we went about it. It introduces a little bit of formality. So we asked this coach who we were just paying hourly as needed, who's done EOS before. But again, it's not like you have to have someone who's done EOS specifically, because we had never hired a director of sales, a director of operations. Like, that seems very foreign to us. So we were having to just get advice on how do you go from just your trusted engineer over here that works in the ticketing queue to this conversation of, do you want to apply to be the director of operations? Hopefully that kind of gives an idea of how we went about that conversation.
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of this applies to businesses of a certain minimum size. And I think Sam pointed this out to me at one point. Sam, didn't you say it was like a minimum of five people, something like that in the company?
For the EOS?
Yeah.
I think it was like $2 million, or 5 people. Maybe Lucas would know better, but I did read the book recently, Rocket Fuel, Lucas. So I did want to talk about that. But cool. Yeah, I did some homework, man. Nice.
Good night.
Yeah, but I think it was something like $2 million in revenue or 5 employees minimum or something, so that you can have those roles assigned.
Yes, and that was one of the questions I asked our coach, our implementer of EOS, was, hey, listen, are we too small? And he said, absolutely not. Because I referenced the exact same thing about the book, that it's really not designed for a under 1 million in revenue company. And he was right, because the exercise, say you're only like 2 people or even 1 person, the first exercise that you go through is to create that org chart. And what that does, I know it sounds so simple, but you get to see the structure on paper and you get to see your name in 7 boxes, right? And that's, I do invoices, I do customer service issues, I do ticketing work. I'm also a senior engineer. I'm also marketing. Even if you're only 1 or 2 people, it gives you that look of, okay, when I hire the next person, what names what boxes am I going to be removed from? So it gives you that visual kind of set of goals. With each hire, we are going to move my name out of these boxes.
Yeah, I was thinking about our listeners as well, and some of them are one-man operation, and some of them do have a number of individuals like you do. And that's a direct question of if they want to implement something like this, or just look at some way for growth. It doesn't have to be this particular method. What do I need to start with? What's my minimum? What revenue do I need to create for a plan of this magnitude? I think it's daunting. Well, let's say you're 1 or 2 people and you do want to grow. It's daunting to think about, how am I going to hire? What is business development like? I need someone that can bring in, when they work for an hour, that they bring in $1 for me. And business development, ideally speaking, I'm sure would bring in that money by finding new business, but it seems scary. Like to just, I'm going to start paying somebody and hopefully you'll bring in some money for me.
It is really scary. And again, I understand it's an audience, so it's not going to be the same answer for necessarily everyone. But I think generally speaking, one thing that has served us well, and just reading books and whatnot, is to lean on your strengths. So Joe's answer might be different from Jerry's or someone else's answer because their strengths might be different. And for example, I'm CEO, but I'm also still director of marketing at Foojee, because out of everyone at Foojee, I'm the best suited to do videos or to be the voice in our email newsletters, right? So I'm technically in 2 boxes still. And so that's really where I would strongly recommend is think about where your strengths are. And if you are handling like new leads and doing engineering, that's fantastic. But are you also doing invoicing still? Or are you also still doing payroll? Are you also still like paying taxes and the business insurance? Your next hire doesn't have to be an engineer per se or a salesperson per se. And honestly, I would go so far as to say, as the founder, in my experience, you are probably the best person to stay in sales for a very long time because no one else can talk about it like you can. And trying to bring in an outside salesperson who's like commission based to know the nuances of M365 licenses and Dropbox migrations and Synologies. There's so much to learn, right? And actually, for the longest time until we implemented this, I was leading sales. Like my name was in the director of business development box until Josh assumed that role. And I'm still mentoring him, and I get roped into some of those calls with him as still. Because guess what? As the founder, you've got the passion, you've got the context, you have those horror stories that really can communicate the value of backup or security software. So I would keep that money that you would pay a salesperson, keep it in your pocket, and really consider hiring a tier 1 engineer so that you're getting your password reset tickets off your plate and kind of the basic troubleshooting tickets off your plate. And that's how we found our scale really is by always hiring for the entry level role, because naturally as they get more seasoned and we pay for their certification tests, they'll grow into a more advanced role. And as the founder, you're really going to be the best salesperson 9 times out of 10. Or maybe as a founder, you hate sales, but you can spin up an MDM or a server so quickly, and you've got someone on your team who likes interfacing with humans. It could change slightly, but I think 9 times out of 10, the founder really is the best suited for sales.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point that it took me a long time to realize. I remember in the early days, I thought it was a point of pride. I would say to clients, I'm not a salesperson. I'd say it to myself too. I just didn't really think that was a role that was relevant to my company. It was just people need help and I'm able to provide help and there'd just be a natural fit. And maybe that was true to some extent in the early days as a one-person operation when I could only handle a certain amount of business and there was enough demand where it just naturally ebbed and flowed. And I found the work that I needed just very naturally through word of mouth. But really, even then, I was doing sales. I just wasn't calling it that. I was promoting solutions to clients, like making observations and saying, what would be really good for you? This would be really cool. You'd really benefit from this. So that's sales. And it took me like a really long time to realize that actually I'm good at sales and I don't mind doing it. I like doing it. Yeah. And also as a founder, as the business owner, there's an intrinsic motivation to make sales in a very natural way. I'm not working for commission. I'm not like just trying to sell everything to everyone. I'm selling what is a natural fit. And there's of course a motivation for me to make sales, to keep the business gears turning and to be profitable. But I think we've all been on the other side of that sales call with clients who are talking to a vendor and you're on the phone with a vendor, a sales rep from a vendor who is not technical and they can't often answer our questions on behalf of the clients, or they just basically just give you a yes to everything. They promise you the moon. And when it comes time to actually implement the solution and work with the integrator or take care of it ourselves on a technical level, we start to realize what's actually possible and what's not possible. And that's really frustrating for us, but also certainly for the client. And so, yeah, having that alignment between the person with the most experience in the field also doing sales, there's just a very natural kind of process there. And it comes off as a very honest process as opposed to just trying to push sales on people. So that's an interesting point to keep that in your column for as long as necessary, really, until you can find somebody who has the relevant technical experience that you can elevate more to that level. I think that's a really interesting angle.
And for those reasons, but also like Sam pointed out, man, do you take that risk on hiring like this expensive salesperson? What's great about going with engineers first is you're able to start an entry-level engineer or technician is going to be among the most affordable roles you can hire. And we're all here just running cash-based businesses. We can't just go offer $100,000 like sales role or to someone on the street and just hope for the best after 3 to 6 months. Knowing leaning on your strengths and then mentoring, bringing in like a junior engineer to start doing those easier tickets.
Yeah, I think this whole thing, the idea of implementing EOS, my interest in this goes back a few years where several different people over the years have been, promoting it to me. And I've been hearing about it. I got the audiobook a while back. I think I actually started with I forget what the title was, but the book that's more for your staff. Why have we decided to implement EOS in our company? And it's like the staff facing version. So I started with that for some reason. And then I realized that this was not the right audience. And I went back and restarted, I think it was Traction. Is that one of the...
Yeah, that I think has been their best-selling book. And Traction really gives you like how to do it, how to run EOS. But it wasn't the first book I read. It was the one that Sam read, Rocket Fuel, that introduces this concept to the founder of having two leaders of the company, which are basically your CEO and CO, that they name your visionary and integrator, respectively. But then Traction we used to give to our leadership team once we promoted them as their homework assignment for their new managed leadership role was to read Traction so that we all know how we are going to operate on a weekly, monthly, and quarterly basis.
Gotcha. Yeah. I have a lot of interest in it, even though I'm not quite at the right scale as far as the number of employees and the revenue. But I always am interested in learning about this kind of thing, especially when several different people all recommend it, including several recently besides your, I think, interview on the Mac Admins podcast talking about it. So I'm getting this signal from multiple different angles and thinking there must be something in here that I can gain, even just like you said, the concept of the visionary and integrator. I made some notes as I was reading this and just thinking about things in that way and starting to pull useful bits of information out of it, but also realizing that if I were to dive into implementing this in my team, even if that just means hiring for certain roles where I want to move myself out of that box and hire for that role, it means putting on a new hat in addition to all the other hats that I have, which is then EOS integrator in this case. Of course, I could hire a coach. That's an option. But actually, like working on this in my team just adds new responsibilities, finding a person who could fit that role and then training them. There's a certain amount of company culture building. And I wanted to circle back to something you said earlier about centralizing your operations. I think that's a really smart aspect, especially when implementing the EOS system, to like for you to have one consistent company culture. It's easier to do that when you have more of a centralized kind of operation, in addition to the very obvious like economy of scale of just having that be more centralized. But I think those are important aspects too. And I could see in the role of visionary and CEO being able to work with each of those people on the team, if that's my sort of quote unquote one job, one box to be in, to have the time to do that. Whereas where I find myself now in probably 9 different boxes, my time is pretty split among lots of things. And it's hard to multitask being a visionary or implementing company culture and that kind of thing. So that's my struggle currently, but I still think going through this exercise is probably useful as a way to look toward the future. I can aim for where you are now, Lucas. That's a pretty advantageous position to be in. Even just those 2 roles, like marketing would seem to be a relatively easy thing to hand off when the time comes for you to be able to say, is there a company we can just simply contract with, or somebody on staff who would do marketing that could just, you make sure it's a cultural fit and then they can run with it at that point. That's pretty awesome. You've gotten to that point. I wanted to circle back to the beginning as well. How did you grow to these now 4 different locations? Was that through acquisitions, or did you find yourself just identifying new markets and like hiring a person in that area?
Right. Great question. A little bit of both. But I want to earmark one of your previous comments about slowly growing while also having to multitask as a visionary.
Yeah.
And it seems like a chicken and egg problem. So I do want to come back to that, because that was one of the biggest eye-opening realizations I had when doing EOS on what was holding us back from, because even though you might be 1 or 2 or 3, we still had the same problem when we were 7. Like talking to my coach, like, how are we supposed to hire someone new or hire this role or that leader when we're barely like making enough to just pay people? We're not even like really taking much profit home. We're just paying our people. So even though sure, annual revenue number might be bigger, we were still at break even trying to figure out how do we grow this thing. As far as the cities go, we did an acquisition for the first city, and it ended up being a great fit because he was actually wanting a team and was more of an engineer. So he had some entrepreneurial drive, but he really preferred the idea of working with a team. And that was just lucky that it was our first go, because the next 2 cities were new hires that actually both had come from the Apple Store. And there was still an interview process, because at the time we were looking for someone who was multifaceted. Okay, are you ready to like work longer hours? We want to work a 40-hour week here, but sometimes stuff hits the fan, or sometimes a proposal comes in, or you have to work on a proposal Thursday night at 10 o'clock. Like, we're not Apple with corporate 40-hour limits here. So it was finding the right person with the right, just drive to want to be a city leader. And now, like, it was really hard to find that person. And so now that we've moved to this more centralized approach, it's going to be much easier. We haven't done it yet because we're using this year to get in a better financial position before looking for our next city. But the next time we hire in a new area, we're going for an engineer who can just be an amazing part of our team and focus on being a great engineer. And then our director of business development will do we'll cultivate that business in different ways in the market, give a couple of trips here and there. So only one was actually an acquisition. And it was also, again, we got lucky because he was in only 1 or 2 years into his business. So he didn't have a lot of like rooted procedures or a complicated CRM or ticketing system. We got lucky. And I can't imagine doing like an actual acquisition as a small business. That just seems so freaking difficult because we already are so busy. Not to say it won't work, but and sure, if an opportunity came where there was a great fit with someone, would we consider that? Yeah, it would be, but it's just path of least resistance. We're going to be able to grow our footprint by looking for engineers at this point.
So Lucas, listening to all this, I would imagine that most of your work comes from the corporate sector. Is that a correct assumption?
It's small business. So it's 20 people and fewer. We do about 1% revenue in residential.
So speaking for myself, I've represented myself on the show for the last 10 years as being an army of one. And I came from a family-owned business. It was a manufacturing business. We had 12 people working for us, and then we had 3 people in management, including myself. And most of my skills of running my business, doing tax returns, quarterly tax filing back in the day when I would do payroll and things like that and sales on the road, comes from this experience that I had in my previous life. But in running my entrepreneurial Mac shop here, it certainly didn't not cross my mind of expanding and hiring somebody or making that leap, that first step. And it sounds incredibly daunting to take that business model and move it to another state. So kudos to you and your team. That absolutely blows my mind. And being able to unify it under the Foojee brand is truly impressive. But just for the guys and gals like me that are listening and they're an army of one and we're trying to pay the mortgage and feed the kids, taking on more staff or more overhead, that seems, as Joe pointed out or Sam pointed out, that's a scary kind of thing. What if you had to give some armchair advice to me and we're sitting drinking a beer after an ACES conference, what would you tell me to do? What would be the first thing that I could do to make a positive step to growing my business? Because I really would love to hear your wisdom.
Awesome. Man, that's such a great question. And I'm happy to share the wisdom of all the bruises and scratches that I've got. If I had to do it again, I probably wouldn't go multi-city. And I certainly not anyway as early as we did. It's really, if McDonald's were to have a mediocre burger and try to go into multi-states with a mediocre burger, it's backwards. You have to have the Big Mac first.
Sure. Before
you can grow. And I think if I had more like structure around me, like in terms of giving people authority to say no to me, besides it's not like I'm a micromanager or anything, or I don't surround myself with yes people. People just trust you because you're the founder. But now with EOS, people can actually vote me down, which is incredibly liberating. I love it. So I think we probably weren't in the best financial position to grow to cities because we would basically say, hey, I think I have someone that I could afford in Atlanta, but my ambition wanted me to go to Alabama. And I would probably have been better served staying in Atlanta and growing my core of 3, 4, 5 people here before I try to have a remote engineer. Okay. So I want to say that first.
Yeah. What was that vision though, to go to another state? Was it an opportunity that was really ripe for the taking, or was it just spearfishing?
It is based, our perspective is that it's based on where we have found the most success with our leads, and that's Apple stores. And it's all based on these like assumptions. And if one of those assumptions is not accurate, like if something happened to the Apple stores, all this would fall apart, which is not great also. So this model is based on the assumption that we actually do, unfortunately, get most of our leads from Apple stores. Let me correct. We don't get a flood of leads. Okay. Like our phones are not ringing off the hook because Apple stores do have a lot of turnover and they have their own corporate goals and all this stuff. But if we looked at our data And it's, oh my goodness, 8 out of 10 of our customers actually just came from an Apple store over the last year. So it was based on that assumption and saying where would be the next sort of market nearby, because we're not this big corporate company. It needs to be nearby so I can drive over there every couple of months, or we can go install a new firewall in a pinch for this new hire. So really staying, I hate to say it, proximity matters in 2023, but staying close. And it was, again, this could be a false assumption too. The reason why I wanted to go multi-state was based on the assumption that maybe our market was getting tapped out. So let me see what another market would be able to add. Now, any business consultant would probably say Atlanta is never going to be tapped out, where it's a gigantic metropolitan area. I just need to do better sales, and I will totally accept that criticism that we probably can still grow quite a bit here in Atlanta. But again, like, I'm not perfect. I knew that Apple stores had at least some leads coming through. It was like a somewhat reliable source of new introductions. Could we just grow a bigger presence? So call it just dumb ambition on the reason why.
I could see the sort of like market, even a large metropolitan area being tapped out for the low hanging fruit, the leads that may be easier to pursue, especially if like your main lead source is the Apple store, which I want to put an asterisk next to that and come back to it because that's pretty interesting to dig into. But let's say that's your main source of leads as you've identified it. That assumes that the leads that you may be getting already have a relationship with the Apple store or may be pursued by the Apple store through Apple's marketing to be able to come in through that channel. Otherwise, essentially, they would have been harder to access for you. Seeing that could be tapped out just in the realm of the easier leads, I think it makes a lot of sense. And then wanting to tap into a similar market of relatively easy to access leads in a new area could make sense. So what is the secret? Do you have any sort of actionable tips for our listeners about building the relationship with the Apple store, even in light of the turnover there,
Yes.
and how to get those leads? Because 10 to 15 years ago, it was show up with a box of donuts and coffee, munchkins, which is not even a possibility anymore. I think they actively refuse that kind of whining and dining. So what is the method now?
Yes. Yeah. Happy to share what we do. And I also want to answer Jerry's armchair advice that he asked for, if I can, on what would someone in his position, one person shop, do to take that daunting first step. It may not be the same for everyone, but I think it could be an inexpensive step if you hire out the responsibilities that don't make your company unique. And so what I mean by that, Jerry, is you're a terrific guy. I've only seen your thumbnail, great looking guy, but people probably don't care that Jerry sends the invoices. There's nothing unique that Jerry is doing on the way that you pay your quarterly taxes or have to renew your annual errors and omissions insurance with your insurance company. I always hired out for my office manager to do invoices early on. That was something that from the start, I never did myself because I knew it was just occupying my time. But it took me a while to finally relinquish like the annual insurance renewals and quarterly tax payments. But honestly, that, as sacred or valuable as those jobs are, the market for that type of person who can work from home and be with their family is massive. You can really find people who are willing to work hourly or less expensive than a technician to do that work. I would hire out as much back office stuff as you can, including taxes and insurance and things that need Jerry's signature. Still just have them email you when they need the signature. But they do 99% of those back and forth emails. I know those emails are easy, but it's Jerry's mind space, it's distractions. And then once that's tapped out, and maybe you're paying 40 grand a year slowly. Maybe you start at $5,000 a year total, 10 grand a year. And they're now basically running your back office and you're doing every sales engineering. Then you can afford to hire a junior engineer to do the smaller ticket items. So that's, I think, again, if we're just giving.
I know it's certainly all really great tips. And I know my colleagues here, I know they've done some of that. But then there's that next step. So I don't want to put you on the spot and make you come up with the next step for maybe Joe or Sam or both of them. But
you just start charging to be a coach after that.
I think it takes an exceptional individual to do what you've done, and it's extremely impressive. But I think the advice I would like to put out there, even though I'm not the expert here tonight, is for anyone listening, I think treading lightly is always a really good thing to do. We've had a couple of people on the show back in the early days who ran businesses and were very ambitious, and they've moved on to working for other companies. And because it didn't, for whatever reason, maybe they moved too fast and broke things, or maybe they moved and instead of increasing the bottom line, it decreased the bottom line. So it ended up being
I've done that too.
Returns.
You really never know their story. That's, I think, why I try to be as candid as I can without wearing my heart on my sleeve. But in fact, 5 years ago when we did our first episode, I had to lay someone off when an enterprise contract ended, and it sucked so much. And so I've definitely been there. And the one advice can't be applied to everyone. But I think as far as a truth that I've seen continually in other industries and in our business is to lean on your strengths that make you unique as the founder, and just try to hire other things out little by little. And what I'm going to do is maybe fast forward a little bit. We'll eventually get back to this EOS thing. I didn't realize, Jerry, that I needed, even 13 years in, I needed a CO, or just someone to run the business. And it wasn't until I saw my name in all these boxes where I realized I can't really be passionate and look for the trends and innovate on where Foojee is going to head next if I'm being frustrated with these really significant issues in the business, or annual reviews and raises and all this kind of like business owner stuff. Turns out there's a role for that. It's called the CO, and it's not new. Like, COOs have been around since the dawn of business, and CEOs, when you never see someone on stage, I just realized this recently, you never see someone on stage with the title CEO and COO. But as founders, we think that we can do both, because who else is going to run the business? And it turns out there are people who do that really well. And there was someone on my team who was kind of my number two guy, where we slowly removed him from tickets little by little. So like, it's this thing that we've had to learn. It's like a muscle. I had to learn how to slowly remove myself from the ticketing queue. It took me a lot of years, over a decade. And now I'm mentoring Justin on how to do that. Right. And now we're mentoring our director of operations on how to do that, because we still have to pay our director of ops to do tickets, right? Money's not growing on trees, but it's little by little where he actually tracks it. He's like, hey, I only did 8 tickets this week, and we celebrate that. So I guess what I wanted to say is that if you're at the size of 3 or 4 like Joe, it's elevating those engineers to do more operational work, policies, maybe have one person take over customer service issues or billing questions, not just issues, but billing questions, or maybe your credit card didn't go through. Get that off of your plate. And one thing that I didn't realize was also having another engineer also be the project manager. And I'm like just shocked that it took me so long to learn these fundamental things. But we like doing everything ourselves, and we're all like trusting our team members because we're all smart people here. But guess what? When we had one person coordinate all of our projects, we're not talking big projects, like 5-person iMac purchases and 10 iPad setups or installing a firewall. We have an engineer just run all the projects. He's the point person for that. And every other engineer was so grateful. Oh my gosh, that's incredible that it's removed the friction from 3 other people, or whatever number it is, that they don't have to deal with the intricacies of when the firewall is going to arrive. Have we placed the order for the firewall yet? Oh, this date changed. Or now what we've done, in the same way I talked earlier about our leaders getting to focus 100% on their leader role. Now an engineer gets to focus 100% on engineering and not be splintered by things that I always thought came with the job, but actually project management is a different task. So again, someone in Joe's position, I would start to try to recognize these tasks like project management or customer service issues and billing questions as separate roles that your current employees could actually do if they want to help grow.
Lucas, I was thinking about growing a one-man shop out of nothing. I read about this, the integrator role and then the visionary. And I'm like, am I the visionary? And I thought for a while, I was like, I guess I am, but I feel like I'm a little older and less ambitious than I used to be. So I don't mean this in a negative sense for anyone that's my age or above, but I think with Jerry and I talking about this, his comment of tread lightly and my thought of maybe I'm a retired visionary is thinking about it does feel like you need that sort of ambition, and it doesn't have to be youth, but that ambition, or else maybe you feel like you don't wanna, like just flat out, I don't wanna. It's gonna take too much time. And there's that aspect of it as well, where you absolutely need to have that drive in you, or else it's just not going to work. And there's that aspect of it too, personality and drive.
And I want to acknowledge that because I've personally had seasons like that, right? Where you just, dadgummit, I'm exhausted. You got the kids, the family, the mortgage, especially as the kids grow and the time commitment increases with the kids. And what's funny is actually in that Rocket Fuel book, when it's talking to the founder about these two roles, visionary and integrator, it actually says, talking to the visionary.
So we're really enjoying talking to Lucas Acosta. What we're going to do is we're going to put a pause in the show right now. And what we'd like you to do is to come back for our second part of talking to Lucas Acosta from Foojee. Next week, if you're a Patreon subscriber, you're going to hear a brand new show from Command Control Power. And then the following week, we're going to rejoin with Lucas, and you can come back and hear the continuation of our conversation with a lot more insightful information.
Of customers of all kinds. Am I on the cloud? Joe spins